Jeremy Aguero from Applied Analysis, thank you for joining us. Take us through just how bleak this unemployment picture is in Nevada.
Well, I mean, in terms, bleak is a hard thing for me to define, but it's the highest rate of unemployment we've seen in modern times, combined with the size of our population and the lack of diversity in our workforce. I think it's very compelling and very problematic.
Can you put a percent on it now?
Yeah, we're estimating that the current unemployment rate is approaching 29% in Southern Nevada. Just to put that into perspective, at the high point during the Great Recession, unemployment was about 13 to 14%. We're about double what it was during the Great Recession.
Have we seen the worst of the layoffs, or do you expect more companies to lay off going forward?
Well, there's a lag in the data that we're seeing, so without a doubt, the numbers are probably going to get somewhat worse. We expect to peak unemployment sometime in mid to late May, and we are expecting that to exceed 30% of our workforce.
You know, I was here for the last recession, as you were, and there's a lot of talk about diversifying the economy so when something like this happened again, we'd be better prepared. Did we learn any lessons from that, or did we just kind of let that go by the wayside?
You know, John, we did a lot of things with regard to economic development and diversification in the state of Nevada. I would argue, really, during the past decade, we were one of the most successful states in the United States in terms of attracting, retaining, and growing new and diversified businesses. On the other side, however, our hospitality industry continues to flourish and continue to grow. It was almost difficult for us to be able to get ahead of that, if you will. You know, and everything that we did from an economic development and diversification perspective, we still remain among the least diversified economies of our size in the United States today, which is without a doubt creating additional difficulties now as this particular economic crisis acutely impacts economies like ours that are dependent on people deciding to get on a plane or get in a car and take a vacation.
And during the Great Recession, there was a lot of unknowns in that how many foreclosures would there be going forward and the other shoes that would drop going down the line with bank failures and such. Here, it just seems like there's a finish line, and that would be the vaccine, and then things will snap back to normal. Do I have that right, or is that overly simplistic?
Look, I don't think it's going to work exactly like that. I think it's going to come back in phases, right? Certainly as the economy opens back up, we think there's about a third of employment that's going to rapidly be reemployed as a result of that. Then we think there's about another third of the employment that's going to come online as we establish some kind of new normal relative to our economy. And then we think there's about a third of the workforce that's going to take some time to come back. As a matter of fact, we're looking at somewhere between an 18 and 36-month recovery cycle. You point to what is the most important factor, and that is a vaccine or some kind of treatment that can make people feel better generally, that they're not as much at risk. But that's going to take some time until that happens. And in the interim, our economy is going to try and find some degree of stabilization. Exactly what it looks like with social distancing from a retail and general business operating standpoint, we have some idea, but it's going to take some time to really feel it out and get a sense of how it's going to stabilize under those conditions.
What kind of workers will be heading back to work right away, and then what type of workers will be out for 18 to 36 months?
Yeah, I don't think you can say that there's one sector of the economy that's going to get back to work immediately while others are going to lag behind. I think when you look at our tourism industry, we can expect some of those employees to get back to work, as some travelers will come back. Not all of them will come back, but some certainly will. I think from a retail standpoint, you're going to see some of those employees come back. I think from a manufacturing standpoint, once that gets stabilized, you'll see those type of things come back. But John, it's not just about the social distancing. It's also about the fact that our economy has been reduced substantially, right? We are in recession. And as a matter of fact, we're probably in a pretty significant recession as we sit here today, although at a technical standpoint, it won't be identified as such for some time to come. And that's going to mean that not only do we have to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, but we're also going to have to deal with the fact that consumers have less disposable income. And that's going to affect folks as well. So I think it's going to be a general decline of the economy as a whole. Now, one other thing I think is worth pointing out is that our tourism-based economy is acutely at risk as a result of what's going on, right? About 20% of our visitors come from international points of origin. It's going to take them longer to come back. About 16% of our visitors are conventions, trade shows, corporate events, things like that. Those mass gatherings obviously are going to take some additional time to come back. So the employees obviously that are servicing those specific segments, I would expect to be more delayed than in some other sectors or subsectors of our economy.
Can you break down the tourism numbers more, defining people into like various groups, as into those who are very concerned about the virus and those who think it's overblown?
Yeah, I mean, the data that we've seen so far has largely come from national reports that have been done. Obviously, there's some important research that's being done here by the CVA as well as our partners, and sort of taking that deeper dive. But when we look at it right now, what we're expecting to see based on historical precedent is it kind of, again, falls into three buckets. You've got the first bucket of consumers that really feel like this isn't that big of a risk to them, and so they're ready, willing, and able, as soon as they're allowed to come and visit Las Vegas because, frankly, they're just looking for an escape from being quarantined for the better part of the past 2 months. Then you've got another group of visitors that want to travel and are willing to travel, but are really waiting for assurances. They're really waiting for Dr. Fauci or the governor or other health officials to come out and say, hey, it is safe to go travel again. And like you said, that may happen gradually, but would be most significant when there's a vaccine or some kind of treatment. And then I think you've got a third group of travelers that are unlikely to travel for some time. They're going to take a wait and see attitude relative to Las Vegas. And within all of that, we have to understand that what Las Vegas is going to be able to offer to those consumers is going to be a more limited than it was in the past. What are they going to do when they come here? And that's going to be incumbent upon our tourism industry to really get creative. And if there's one thing the industry has been able to do in the past, it's been resilient and resourceful to reinvent itself, whether it's a recession or some other type of national event or international event that's going on. I believe that they'll be able to do it again, but it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of creativity.
So those big major events that we used to all get excited about and rally around and give a lot of news coverage to, those, at least until there's a vaccine, are pretty much gone.
Well, look, or at least they're going to look a lot different than they did before, right? I mean, right now it's pretty hard to imagine how you have a major concert and that recognizes social distancing, at least the way that you and I might think about it in those ways. It's hard to imagine a major citywide convention being held here and being able to meet some of those standards. Look, I believe in progress. I believe in technology. We will find ways to adapt to the current environment. But to your point, I think the faster we get to vaccine and treatment so that people have the confidence to be able to come and sort of do the things they would have otherwise done the way they normally would have done them. Until we have that, it's hard to imagine us getting back to where we were just a couple of months ago.
The Raiders are supposed to be such an economic driver for this community. Has that changed now?
Look, I still
short term.
Yeah, look, I still think the Raiders are going to be an economic driver for this community. I think a big part of why the governor has had construction activity, including at Allegiant Stadium, continue is because of the expectation that when our economy comes back on, it is going to be things like Allegiant Stadium that are going to signal to the rest of the world and the rest of this country that Las Vegas is open for business. I commonly think of the analogy that what happened during the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, we built T3 over at McCarran International Airport, the new terminal that was there. And all kinds of people said, we shouldn't have built it. It was a bad idea to build it. The economy wasn't going to come back very strong. Las Vegas may change forever. But for T3, I don't think we could have seen the expansion that we saw in our tourism economy over the past 10 years. I think it was a lot of foresight and, frankly, a lot of political courage to construct that project in the midst of what was a historic economic downturn at the time. I think the same is true relative to not only Allegiant Stadium, but the Convention Center project, and even seeing some of the other major construction that's occurring. I think it may be very, very important to our ability to not only restabilize our economy, but signal to the world that Las Vegas is open for business.
And our state budget, is it fairly been blown apart now by the COVID-19?
Yeah, blown apart's always a difficult thing for me to say, but I understand where you're coming from. We do expect that the state budget's going to see a deficit this fiscal year. So that means by June 30th of somewhere between $700 million and $900 million. Yeah, that's as big as we've ever seen in that amount of time. There are some mitigating factors, of course. Whether the federal government allows the state to use some of the funds from the CARES Act to offset revenue losses, whether our economy picks up, and how long long we stay really with our economy shut down will affect some of those numbers. But John, that amount of a deficit is even greater than the rainy day fund that we held, as well as most of the ending fund balance that the state of Nevada currently has. That's a pretty perilous position for us. And again, it's going to take a lot of hard work, not only by the state, but I think also by local government officials to get those budgets shored up and make sure that they can preserve essential services.
So what does that mean for Nevadans then when you talk about just how bad off this budget is?
No, I think it means a great deal of things. I think it means that some of the services that have been provided by state and local governments, they may have a more difficult time doing. I mean, obviously there are core services, things like police protection and fire protection, things like K through 12 education and higher education that people just believe need to happen no matter what the economy is like. But, I mean, it's going to be difficult for the state and local governments to maintain even those services if revenues drop the way we're seeing them, and that carries into 2021. I think it could mean the state not only looks to shore up its expenses as well as local governments, but may also be looking for new revenue sources to try and generate some additional dollars as well. And then there's things that we don't normally look at. There's been a lot of attention paid to things like the unemployment insurance that's going out. Obviously, we have a lot of people receiving that, a hugely important part of our social safety net. But we are going to burn through the amount of money that the state of Nevada has in that unemployment insurance, I think, relatively quickly. We've already seen states like California have to go to the federal government to borrow money to be able to continue to pay those. That is a situation we'd really like to not see Nevada get in.
Will we see a number of states declare bankruptcy?
I doubt that you'll see a bunch of states declare bankruptcy. The reason being is I think the federal government has a remarkable interest in making sure that that doesn't happen. The stabilization of our municipal and our state governments is essential to the way Nevada functions. The same way that the federal government has tried to shore up the private sector, I think you can expect to see some additional assistance for the public sector. We've even seen some relief in terms of what are very substantial loan opportunities for state and local governments that could help them build a bridge to get to the other side. Again, John, I would hate to see Nevada start to borrow money to pay recurring expenditures, but in order to stabilize our economy in this type of situation, I could certainly understand where that might be part of the solution.
As Nevada does reopen its economy, is there a possibility of lawsuits coming if these cases flare up again?
I don't think there's any doubt about it, and I think it's actually an excellent question. When we think about this crisis that we're going through, we really see it as having four phases. The first of those phases is the public health crisis, which obviously has been at the forefront of everything we've seen and heard. The second is the economic crisis. The third is a fiscal crisis, the stability of state and local governments, as you were just alluding to. And on the back end of this crisis, we think is a legal crisis. This includes lawsuits against businesses. We've already heard ones for things like Carnival Cruise Lines and things like that for people that were stuck on those cruise ships and the like. Certainly some businesses are going to be concerned about whether it's their employees or patrons that happen to get sick and decide to bring some type of lawsuit. There's also going to be issues relative to things like force majeure, which is just a fancy way of saying contractual provisions that say in the event there is an act of God, like what we're seeing today, that certain requirements of contracts are no longer required. And then ultimately, as you mentioned, the potential to have bankruptcies, restructurings, foreclosures, all of which are legal proceedings. I think the back end of this economic cycle is going to be very much about legal ramifications associated with COVID-19.
What does Jeremy Aguero tell his friends on how to prepare for life in Nevada going forward?
Well, look, I think right now it's all about maintaining some degree of normalcy, the best that you can. I'll tell you the same thing that it was for my family and my colleagues here. It sort of has been in a few phases. The first of those phases was, really being scared, right? How do we do this? How do we adapt? How do we adjust? And then there was a phase, really, I would say about 2 to 3 weeks ago, where both my colleagues and to some degree my family sort of they just was almost resigned. Okay, this is what we have to do. We don't like it, but we'll make the best out of it and do what we can. And then what I've seen really in the past 3 weeks is people getting creative, people thinking about it. Okay, if this is the way it's going to be, we're going to figure out how to do it the best way we can. We're going to figure out how to work better. We're going to figure out how to do things as a family differently than maybe we did before. We're going to figure out how to serve our clients differently than we did before. I think, number one, trying to preserve as much normalcy as possible in a period that is anything but is critically important. But also, I think learning how to adapt and climb is going to be critical to the success not only of businesses, but individuals in this environment.
Jeremy Aguero from Applied Analysis, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your insight with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.